Good morning. I hope that everyone enjoyed that coffee break, and welcome to our session on electromagnetic spectrum warfare. I'm Colonel William Dollar Young, the commander of the 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing, and I will be your moderator for this morning's panel. Things are moving fast in the EMS space. In the last year, the Air Force has stood up the 350th Electromagnetic Spectrum Warfare Wing to truly get after these challenges from an organizational perspective. But it's a whole-of-nation challenge, which is why I'm honored to be joined by our distinguished panelists on the stage this morning. Members of Congress have called for military head of EMS warfare, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin recently approved an EMS superiority strategy for the Defense Department. It's becoming clear that the U.S. military faces an all too familiar choice: accelerate change or lose. On our panel today, we have Paul Turner, Principal Product Development Engineer for AT&T Mobility and Access Architecture, Lisa O'Coin, Vice President of F-35 Solutions, BAE Systems, Andy Lowry, Chief Product Officer at Epirus. I'll have each of you introduce yourself and give us a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you to the AFA for hosting us here in this wonderful event. I'm having a great time. It's my first event, but I'm having a really fantastic time at it. So first, just a little bit about me. I've been in spectrum warfare and electromagnetics for the majority of my career, at MACOM for a long while, then followed by Raytheon as a chief engineer. There I met a man named Dr. Bomar who had an idea about a better way of building a defense company that could pace technology with, or could sell technology at the pace that the DoD needed in order to kind of keep up with the rapid growth of what we're seeing. So about a year ago, I joined Bo on this quest at Epirus, and I look forward to the panel today. Thank you, Colonel.
Lisa?
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you to all the audience and to the AFA for hosting this as well. A little bit about me. I'm the Vice President of F-35 Solutions. I have about 35 years of experience ranging in engineering, operations, and microelectronics. I'm so sorry. I can talk really loud if I need to.
Well, because of the stream, we have to make sure that it's amplified to get out over the stream. My apologies.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll continue with this one. Okay, all right, and so engineering, operations, and program management. I actually really started my career doing device design, which is kind of foundational to all of the high-speed electronics that are really important in the electromagnetic warfare spectrum. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. Recently, I was the Vice President of Engineering at our electronics systems sector, leading a group of about 5,000 engineers. And I'm really excited today to tell you about what we're doing to advance electronic warfare at BAE Systems.
Just hand off the mic.
All right. Thank you. I'm Paul Turner, go by Kip. I've been with AT&T, Southwestern Bell and AT&T a little over 48 years in roles ranging from field maintenance to supervisory roles now with the wireless access and architecture team of AT&T Labs. Recently, within the past year, have been assigned to help our DoD public sector teams make sure that we're using the latest technology, RF technology.
All right, so as you can see, we are really in for a treat with such a distinguished panel this morning. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Paul, let's start with you. How is the DoD shift to electromagnetic spectrum operations, or EMSO, changing our approach to electromagnetic warfare, and how should telecommunications providers plan and prepare?
Great question. As we were discussing these questions, it should be no surprise that most telecommunications providers really don't think much about electronic warfare. We have started, but we do things to ourselves. For instance, an AT&T site may have up to 8 different spectrum bands, ranging from 700 megahertz all the way up to 39 gigahertz. Operating at fairly high powers, we create passive intermodulation when things in front of the antenna passively generate frequencies that come back to us and actually jam our signals. So we've developed mitigation solutions for those, working with our suppliers, and we're anxious to test those solutions against real EW.
That's actually very interesting, especially given the challenge of putting together various capabilities that have to operate and share the electromagnetic spectrum. So if I could pull on that thread just a little bit, how could the DoD's approach to electromagnetic protection, or EP, change to ensure that this important aspect of EW is appropriately resourced and coordinated across programs?
Well, I feel like the DoD could help to ensure that research continues, encourages the telecom industry, participation from both providers and suppliers to harden their systems against potential EW. Consider things like multifunction research, such as equipment that can perform both communication and detection development.
Okay, and then if I could, just one more, because one of the constant challenges we face is ensuring that the various disciplines that are required to execute this set of highly complex operations doesn't fratricide each other and get in each other's way. So if I could just get your thoughts on how should the DoD change its approach to the relationship between EW, cybersecurity, and network requirements to achieve better results?
Well, it appears the DoD is already changing its approach via the U.S. Cyber Command. However, as previously mentioned, I believe they should encourage ongoing research, development, and foster coordination with wireless service providers, suppliers in the telecom industry to mitigate and prevent EW. I also think, and this is not something that's talked about a lot, should encourage alternative hardened solutions to our synchronization systems. All wireless providers use GPS, and it's vulnerable at some stages. With 5G systems, especially depend on synchronization when you're talking TDD or time division domain modulation to avoid interference. If we lost that synchronization, you could lose entire networks.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. And Lisa, I'd like to build upon your perspective and your experience building fighter EW over a distinguished career. And my first question is, what's the role of a modern EW system on a fighter aircraft?
Thank you, Colonel Young, for asking that question. So, I look at this as the modern electronic warfare has 3 really principal duties. First and foremost is to provide 360-degree situational awareness in real time to the battle space for the pilot. In addition to that, we also have to provision for threat warning and countermeasures. By passively by detecting, geolocating, and identifying threat emitters. In a highly dense signal environment, which gets even better with all these 5G work, right? We allow the pilot to be able to figure out whether or not he or she should engage or evade from the target, right? And I will further say that today's modern EW systems are actually an integral part of the overall weapon system on the fighter aircraft. And so we allow the pilot to focus on that mission to either identify and evade and identify threats without interference to the radar or the radar warning receiver. And that's a really important capability in these complex systems. And then survivability. We really need to continue to employ RF and IR countermeasures to ensure the survivability of the pilot and his or her team.
All right, let's draw a little bit more on the contested nature of the conflict in the electromagnetic spectrum. Can you tell us how are potential adversaries' efforts to challenge EMS superiority impacting EW modernization?
Yeah. Also, again, a great question. And I think it's of no surprise to the audience here that our adversaries have gained on us, right? They haven't been standing still when it comes to exploiting the electromagnetic spectrum as well. So the relying on stealth, as we have in the past, is no longer a sole option, right? And we complicate this picture because the density of signals out there is getting greater and greater, and the commercial space is contributing to that. This makes the job of electronic warfare a lot more difficult, and so we really have to apply new techniques to help us identify those threats. And you know, I think one of the key pieces here is employing the entire spectrum, not only RF, but IR, to kind of branch that range of frequencies to enable us to detect more threats in real time. Innovations in hardware and software that provide greater instantaneous bandwidth, improved emitter identification, greater sensitivity to the radar, and high-speed scanning are key technologies that are imperative for us to keep ahead of the threat. These new techniques will evolve as the threat evolves, and we have to go faster than our adversaries.
All right. And just one more, if I might. The F-35, I believe, is an exemplar of a complex system. What are a few emerging key system attributes that are required to stay ahead of the threat?
So thank you for that question. So a few of those that I think are really important, right? At BAE, we actually have a saying in our EW world, which is speed is life. When it's time to survive, you have to be faster than our adversary. So you need to adapt quickly. And how are we doing that at BAE Systems? One of that is to develop a common hardware platform that supports third-party software so that whoever has the best idea for countering a threat emitter in battle space can do that. It reduces our cycle time so that we don't have to reinvent and build new boxes every single time we need to upgrade our electronic warfare capability. It also improves our sustainability. So the maintainers out there are able to switch LRUs very quickly if a downed aircraft is in a state of battle with another LRU out of another aircraft, or even potentially in the future, another fighter jet. The other thing we need to do is to be very agile. So there are ways that we can non-kinetically confuse the enemy using advanced cyber techniques and spectrum denial that put us in, that confuse our enemy so that we can evade safely. I think one of the key things is that the future of electronic warfare is really about a low latency, optimized to process a lot of data at a high volume with imperceptible delay. So on target.
All right, thank you very much. Andy, let's shift gears and move on to you. You've been in the EW space for 2 decades now. Can you tell us more about Epirus and your journey to the company? And to what do you see as the most pressing capability gaps in DoD's approach to EMS capabilities?
Okay, thank you, Colonel. Yeah, first of all, I kind of gave my background in the opening, so I'm still that same guy. So you can rewind if you didn't see that. Anyways, I think the more pressing question we spoke about when we met not too long ago around gaps in the DoD, and Lisa, you were just kind of referring to, you said a very special word, you said agile. And I think everyone in electromagnetic warfare, spectrum warfare, knows that it's a cat and mouse game. So one of my jobs along the way was the next generation jammer, chief engineer. I'm the one that bid that to NavAir a number of years ago. But what I learned while doing chief engineering of that system is that the adversary is always getting better. And by trying to procure new systems all the time, new hardware all the time, in single functionality isn't working. So what we're looking for at Epirus and what we're working towards at Epirus is multi-function, software-defined systems, right?
Absolutely.
So what's key about that is that I can take a system like our flagship product, Leonidas, which is a directed energy weapons system that's designed primarily to go after counter drones. All groups, all types, commercial, off-the-shelf, and even militarized hardened ones. It's designed to go against those types of drones. But we made the system completely software-defined so that as the threats evolve, we can evolve. Let's say a new threat emerges that's not a drone, it's another piece of electronics. Our system can be updated with apps or missionware, as we like to call it. I'm learning, Colonel, you teach me.
Yes.
And we can do that on the fly. So that means a warfighter has a threat they haven't seen before. We identify it, we study it, we send out to the field real-time over-the-air updates. And now that threat can be taken care of. I think, in general, that type of approach to upgrading systems and such will help with keeping pace with. There will always be bureaucracy in DoD, and I think by going to software-defined systems, primarily software-defined systems, will help keep pace with the pace of technology with DoD.
All right, so I want to pick at that just a little bit because what you're describing sounds amazing, but many people might say, well, Andy, that's just science fiction. What makes you think that you can, in very near term, be able to deliver that capability for the warfighter?
Well, that's a great question, too. So, my last company, actually, I founded, I called it RealWare. And I use the word realware because I had gotten sick and tired as a chief engineer of looking at vaporware. Have you all seen some of that? I haven't. I've never seen vaporware. I've seen some PowerPoint charts that describe it, but I haven't seen the systems. So at RealWare, I always decided to advertise behind where I've advanced to in my systems and my readiness. And that's the same culture we have at Epirus. We don't talk about things that are not ready to field. And a lot of these things sounds like science fiction, but they are science fact. And in the consumer world, they're moving at a pace to create that science fiction into science fact every day. And that's, going back to the word agile. I mean, that's the definition of Silicon Valley is agile. So at Epirus, what we've done is blended Silicon Valley tech, Silicon Valley folks that come from that field, that consumer commercial field, with solid aerospace and defense executives with the aerospace approach. And by blending those two models, we think that we can continue to build software-defined systems that are answering the needs of the warfighter today and then being able to evolve into the warfighter's needs tomorrow.
All right. Well, I think everyone in the room would recognize and acknowledge the fact that within DoD we have a bit of a challenge in terms of procurement and acquisition. So Andy, I'm going to come back to you for one more, and I'd like to get your thoughts on how can DoD's procurement processes and timelines better match the rapid pace of innovation we are seeing from companies like Epirus to ensure our warfighters are equipped with technologies to counter emerging threats?
Well, that question's like almost as hard as meaning of life, I think. So that's a good one. So, right. So on our side, Epirus, that's what our mission is to be there, be that partner with DoD in rapid advancement and rapid fielding of new capabilities. However, you know, just truth be told, it's not totally easy to do, and it's not totally easy. But working in conjunction with different groups like Defense Innovation Unit or RICTO, there are methods being done nowadays to help with the advancement of the maturation of the products and the competition of the products. So I think doubling down and building awareness on what's available to the various military commanders and what types of pots of money that they may have access to that they don't know that they have access to, I think that might be a good way to wedge sort of the ability for DoD to keep up with the pace of technology. And that's really the ultimate threat is we have the engineers to keep pace in America. Do we have the right systems and processes to allow us to keep pace? I guess that's what we're hoping for.
So you're saying there's a chance.
There's a chance.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at this time what we're going to do is we're going to open this up to your questions. And so we have a mic prepared at the center of the room. And what I would ask, if you'll please come to the mic and identify yourself and state your question, please. And we're looking for the really, really hard questions for this panel. Yes, please, if you'll come to the mic. And for those of you that are thinking of your questions, if you'd like to make your way, and then we'll just form a line, and then we'll just go question after question.
I guess it's directed at Mr. Lowry or the whole panel. You talked about doing electromagnetic pulses as a defense weapon. What about offensive laser technology? Have you looked into that, or anybody working on that at this time?
Yes, sir. That's a great question, and I think
If you'll use the mic.
could probably answer it too. At Raytheon, they are pretty good at laser.
And if you'll use the mic to answer. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, thank you. Great question. So just to repeat the question is, what about laser technology? Okay, laser technology is spectrum. It's just way high up in the frequencies, and as you get high in frequencies, you have other side effects. Everything's a pro and a con. A laser can provide very destructive energy with missiles to drones to that sort of a thing, but it continues to go on and on and on beyond the actual target that it's implemented on. So the actual, sort of the science behind that is a little tricky, and you need to be extremely safe with your keep out and all that. The other thing about lasers is they're not very efficient. So how we won at Raytheon Next Generation Jammer was focusing on end-to-end system efficiency, because if you make an inefficient system, you'll need a lot of cooling and a lot of power, which equates to a lot of weight in order to power the system and make the system fieldable. What we've done is we've exercised not a new concept, but maybe a new concept in this particular area, where we've created a microwave phased array out of gallium nitride. And Lisa used to run the Andover fab and knows how great gallium nitride is when it comes to solid state. And versus some approach with high-powered microwave will do a single channel, maybe a TWT or Klystron or something like that, and it'll all flow through there, very high power. But due to the single channel, there's limitations and there's drawbacks and side effects. Whereas in a phased array, you have a distributed amplifier front, so each amplifier is less power, but as you phase it up in front of the array, it allows you to get greater and greater powers, but also have the flexibility of electronic steering, the flexibility of complete wave control, polarization, wavelength, frequency, all sorts of things. So when we talk cat and mouse, a high-powered microwave system that's single channel is sort of a one-trick pony. A laser is a one-trick pony. A software-defined phased array system that has an intelligent front end with embedded ML and AI, which is what Epirus his real claim to fame is our smart power that does the work of that phase array to get those powers and energies to where we need. That's sort of where I think the warfighter needs. That's the type of system the warfighter needs. So thank you. Thank you, guys. Something else?
Yeah, I want to add to that just a quick thing. What you said about high power microwaves and advances in that as a use in the electromagnetic spectrum is really important. But I will say that at BAE Systems, we've been doing laser warning on rotary aircraft for a long time. And so the challenges around swap and efficiency are real, but they're known. And so it's really an engineering problem to understand how you put the right and appropriate laser and what the function you want that laser to do, whether it's directed energy or whether it's laser warning to protect the pilot in the car, in the aircraft.
All right, let's go ahead and take the next question, please.
Hi, I'd actually kind of like to piggyback on your answer to the last question, and that's when you start talking about these advanced systems that both have really intricate microelectronic hardware. You mentioned the GaN, the all RF front end, as well as the software defined on top of it. How do you, in a company or in a customer, manage both the software community and the hardware community, which tend to work in different buildings and different career paths and define themselves as one or the other? And how do you integrate that, and can a company do one and not the other? Are there advantages to having both?
That's a great question, and depending on the company size and scale and how they're organized, I think a different answer. So I would turn it over to AT&T and BAE for the larger company answer. Epirus is a startup. It has about 200 employees, and we view ourselves as skunkworks. I mean, the modern 21st century skunkworks. And so we don't cohabitate like they did up out there in the desert, but we do kind of live, drink, breathe together. We're kind of a community, and I think that integration in what I'd call an appliance model is key. At some point, the software gets down to an embedded level, and it's talking to chips and hardware. And so at some point, there's an interface between software and hardware. Our systems largely rely on embedded software in order to do the smart power, the arbitrary waveform generation, and all of that. So it's a coupling that actually makes a lot of sense. When you get into the more abstracted layers, the higher over the operating system layers, we have a separate group that we basically have good interface meetings with the embedded system group, and that's how we arrange it. At Raytheon, it wasn't too different, but just a much larger scale. You have a...
Go ahead, Paul.
Well, within our group in AT&T, one way that we approach it, we have both software roadmap engineers and we have hardware roadmap engineers. They work with the same supplier, for example, a Nokia or an Ericsson, and they work in concert. So by organizing to put those functions in the same groups, and we do the same thing on our core side as well. It's generated some efficiencies over the years.
So I'll add to that from BAE's standpoint, right? We're a very large company, and so a lot of our engineering is matrixed. But the important part of the matrix piece of this is that when we identify a program or a capability, right, we pull all of those different functions together. So in the case of F-35, for instance, right, we actually organize by something called drop, right? So we have a given capability, so all of the engineers, systems, software, I like to put my firmware engineers in the category by themselves because they have to be very multifunction and multidisciplined. And our hardware engineers together, so they understand what the end item goal is for that capability. So that's how we organize.
All right, thank you very much. Let's take the next question, please.
Okay, this question is aimed at Andy from Epirus. So software-defined radio, my understanding is it definitely gives you the ability to change systems much quicker. But I guess a quick thing that I'm wondering, typically when I think of hardware versus software, I think of software is, in terms of real time, is significantly slower than hardware-based solutions. I was wondering if you could talk to, is that myth now, or have things changed with technology?
Yeah, it's. I guess we could get a little complex, but every sort of piece along the chain of the engineering system is being advanced, and one of the big advancements that are enabling a lot of this digitally defined system is the ability to do rapid digital to analog conversion. So rapid D to A, so I can do direct synthesis of anything. I can just program into the computer and I can synthesize it and create an RF waveform. The issue has been a lot is in the antenna, because after it gets generated and turned to RF and converted, the antenna is usually single-purposed. It just does pulse, or it's compressed, or it's that. EPRIS, what we've done is we've evolved that thinking, and we've embedded what we call RF smart power within the antenna. And it modulates the amplifier in a way using a typical fixed voltages. We modulate those voltages in order to create a definable antenna. So you can think about our phased array as being able to go, dirt, 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 dirt. Okay, now it's a radar antenna. Dirt, 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 dirt. Now it's a high-powered microwave antenna, just by programming it at a system level. So again, getting back to that previous question about embedded or firmware engineers, at EPRIS, they're key to the embedded machine learning that we do in the antenna that can adapt with the missions, whether it's comms, whether it's software-defined radios, whether it's software-defined radars, which are now becoming more prevalent. We can tend to all of those things. Thank you for the question.
Okay, let's have another, next question, please.
Hey, Dollar, a question from a wild weasel. Let me continue to pick on Andy here. Hey, Andy, we'd heard about HPM and high-powered microwaves for the last 20-plus years, and they were going to be a panacea that solved a lot of things, and it never panned out. What's different now?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, that's a great question, too. And I think, I mean, Lisa is almost like has a similar career path as me. She could probably even talk to this. The big thing is that solid state, wide band gap materials like gallium nitride and other more advanced systems have now become rugged enough, with enough power handling capability, enough thermal dissipation capability to become as powerful as the traditional methods, which are TWT-based single channel. If we can meet the same power requirements as the older systems that can kick in the back door and produce these effects, a phased array system allows you infinitely more opportunity to put more energy in the system, to have harmonic type effects in the system, and all of those software-defined things that allow me to do that within on a older sort of legacy system. They didn't think about those things, you know, back in 1960s when they were doing TWTs. They said, what's that? They don't even know what software-defined is. So those are the same technologies that some of the other systems are being fielded with, and they come with a lot of human factor bad byproducts. And so I think that was probably another reason why HPM didn't take off, is that there's a lot of different human factor issues associated with those types of amplifiers. So anyways, Lisa, maybe you have something to say as well from your experience.
Well, not too much, but I will say that the big challenge still remains, which is how do you get all that heat out? And until we can solve that heat problem, we will continue to be, in my opinion, probably at the TRL4 level. And that's really, we need some real key innovations in microelectronics that allow us to have some unique materials that dissipate heat very rapidly for that to work.
And with smart power, I'm driving efficiencies up to the 90s, so that if you have a high conversion of DC energy to RF energy, then obviously you don't create as much heat. And so Leonidas is just air cooled. It's conduction cooled phased array because of the incredibly high efficiencies RF smart power is able to produce.
All right.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay. One more question, please.
Good morning. I'm Deb Driver. I'm with Huntington Ingalls Industries. And as Dollar knows, we worked with him and the others on the EMS ECC team. We have a couple of people here for this conference, and we have heard EMS and EW only a couple of times. We were excited to see this panel on here. But that tells us that there's probably some additional advocacy to be done for the issues here. There are a lot of very difficult technical challenges, and if we do not own the spectrum, we won't be able to fly, fight, and win. If we don't accelerate the change here, we will lose. I'd like to hear from the panelists about what the government can do, what the Air Force can do to help you proceed in these regards. And then I'd very much like to hear from Dollar what he would like to see happen as he's departing. Thank you.
You want to start, Paul?
Well, we have a little bit different spectrum position at AT&T and any wireless provider. We have to use licensed spectrum. We typically, we do use unlicensed spectrum, but we don't advocate that as much. We do the best we can to protect our spectrum, but I really don't know how to follow that.
Okay.
So I think one of the ways that I think we need to be continuing to think about this is, you know, looking at spectrum allocation and all of that will only get us so far. What we really need to understand and to do is to understand how to actually use the spectrum we have. And when I say spectrum, I'm talking not only about the RF microelectronic spectrum, but the IR, the RF and IR, as well as the laser spectrum. So, and one of the keys there is continuing to do research and put money in the areas that, you know, for R&D technology that allow us to do the exquisite signal processing and things to actually pull information out of the spectrum we have. So that's, I think, one of the key areas is that research and development that helps us with the digital engineering, software engineering, and the systems engineering that allow us to, you know, pull signals out of pure noise.
All right. And I did think of something, free space optics. Additional research in long-range, high-bandwidth free space optics for communication purposes. Those things are just now coming to fruition, and it's very exciting.
All right.
I just think, you know, recognition that, you know, sailors and soldiers need to be involved in the design process. And so there needs to be money allocated for folks to travel, to come out and see our systems, to work with us out in the field, to advance the maturation of our systems. As close as we can be coupled to our customer, that's a high desire in kind of my book. So something along those lines would be helpful for us as we continue to advance.
All right, so it looks like we've got just a little over a minute left, and I think that this would be a great opportunity, if I could, in 10 seconds, if each of you could tell us what's the one thing that we have to get right collectively in order to continue to advance our ability to fight in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Want me to go first?
Go ahead.
I'm gonna brown nose the teacher, so to speak, and say missionware. I'm gonna drop that out there. But in all seriousness, software-defined capabilities that doesn't take 5 years to field, that we can field new capabilities. I think overarching, that's going to be the most important thing for spectrum warfare dominance.
Okay, Lisa?
I'll go back to what my theme here has been making use of the entire spectrum in a cooperative manner, right? We tend to think of RF by itself, we tend to think of ER by itself, IR by itself, laser by itself. We need to make all of those things work together to do what we need them to do.
Okay, and Paul has comments.
And from a telecommunications standpoint, speed and cost, speed to market, lowering the cost, and speed and development of 5G features.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to offer our panelists a huge round of applause, and thank you to AFA for our panel.